Mercy, mercy, mercy.
This video will discuss how John Paul II was influenced by Polish Messianism and how it is evidenced in his writing, words, and actions. We've discussed Polish Messianism in other videos and how it was birthed by writers like Adam Mickiewicz and Andrzej Tojiński, whose writings were condemned by the Church. As a brief recap, Polish Messianism is a cultural and philosophical concept rooted in 19th century Polish Romanticism, and it was developed when Poland was partitioned and stateless. Adam Mickiewicz and others framed Poland as a Christ of nations, a nation destined to suffer and sacrifice and ultimately redeem itself and humanity through its spiritual mission. The Church tried to curb these ideas, and as a consequence, in the 1840s, some of its adherents were subject to excommunications and papal condemnation for the unorthodox blend of spirituality and Polish destiny. Karol Wojtyła was born in 1920 and grew up in this environment. As a youth, like many of his compatriots, he had steeped himself in the lore of Polish Messianism, the idea that Poland was the Christ of nations, and that one day it would rise again to point the way for all of humanity. Above all, he loved the poems of Adam Mickiewicz, the romantic apostle and champion of Polish independence, an ideal which the sons and daughters of a dismembered land had dreamt about throughout the 19th century. He came of age during Poland's struggles, first under Nazi occupation and then later under Soviet control. As a young man, he was immersed in Polish literature and theater. During World War II, he performed in clandestine plays by Adam Mickiewicz. These plays celebrated Polish Messianism. This exposure ingrained in him the messianic idea of suffering as being redemptive. Mickiewicz had an important impact on Wojtyła, and his influence continued to be reflected in Wojtyła's theology even after he became pope. Wojtyła's experiences as a priest and bishop further reinforced his view that Poland, and he, was part of a larger spiritual mission. From the beginning of his pontificate, he was linked in Poland to Polish Messianism and Adam Mickiewicz, whose writings had been criticized by the Church. Groups would gather in the Gothic marketplace around the statue of Adam Mickiewicz, the national poet, sometimes draping it with the flag of the Vatican. Wojtyła did his best to strengthen this connection in the minds of the people of Poland. He reinforced this link by frequently citing Mickiewicz's works despite their condemnation by the Church. Shortly after his election to the papacy, he wrote a letter to the people of Poland on October 23, 1978. He quoted one of Mickiewicz's descriptions of Poland. "Dear fellow countrymen, it is not easy to renounce returning to my country, to these fields rich in varied flowers, silvered with wheat and gilded with rye," as Mickiewicz writes. Then 7 months later, in an address to Polish pilgrims, he wrote, "So in our age, too, a new part of the books on Polish pilgrimages is being written, as it was done by Mickiewicz." A few weeks after that, during a speech in Poland, he said, "As Adam Mickiewicz wrote in the books of the Polish people and the Polish pilgrimage, a civilization truly worthy of man must be a Christian civilization." This wasn't just a throwaway line. It was a messianic call, reflecting Mickiewicz's belief in Poland's redemptive suffering leading to a Christian renewal. It reflected John Paul's belief in Poland's perceived spiritual mission, and that Poland's suffering validated its role as a moral exemplar, redeeming Europe's secular drift. Then on June 19th of 1983, in a speech at a monastery, he paraphrased Mickiewicz's Forefathers' Eve, a work steeped in messianic imagery. He alluded to the poet's depiction of Poland's suffering as a sacrificial act for humanity, and he said, "Our Polish freedom costs so much." And this echoes Mickiewicz's themes of martyrdom and resurrection, aligning with John Paul's view of Poland's endurance under Nazism and communism. At Victory Square in Warsaw, at a Mass in June of 1979, he built on the theme of Polish Messianism. "And I cry out from the depths of this millennium, let your Spirit descend and renew the face of the earth, the face of this land." This cry amplifies the messianic overtone, Poland as a spiritual fulcrum, and John Paul as its Slavic voice. As you recall from one of my prior videos, the ideas of Andrzej Tojiński, a condemned heretic, were absorbed and repeated by Mickiewicz, and among these ideas was a mystical universal redemption. Tojiński came up with the peculiar notion that Jews are our elder brothers, Miscavige adopted this from Toyinsky's teachings. They both taught that there was a universal salvation through mystic unity, and Jews and Christians would be reconciled. Please recall that John Paul also held the corresponding belief that there is a reasonable hope that all men are saved. In 1986, John Paul again borrowed from Toyinsky when he visited a Roman synagogue and referred to Jews as our elder brothers. His use of this phrase carries on the heresy of Miscavige and Toyinsky. The problem with all of this is that it just isn't Catholic. The faithful must fear incurring divine wrath as long as they shamefully allow them, the Jews, to do actions that cause confusion in our faith. But the story gets even more interesting from here. One of the fathers of Polish Messianism was Julius Slowacki. Like many of his contemporaries, he was noted for anti-clericalism, and much of his work was condemned by the Church. His burial in a Catholic cemetery had been a matter of controversy. In a poem he wrote, "God has made ready the throne for a Slav Pope, and he will sweep out the churches and make them clean within. God will be revealed clear as day in a creative world." So Slowacki, who had not been a Catholic in good standing, wrote a poem predicting a Slav Pope. And then John Paul wanted to make clear that he was the Slav Pope envisioned by Slowacki. The 19th century poet Julius Slowacki had written in mythic terms of a Slavic Pope that arrives, announcing of the immense bell rung by God and a Pope who is not afraid of swords. On his first trip to Poland as Pope, John Paul II revived and relaunched this vision, applying it to himself. The Slavic Pope, the predestined one, had arrived. His mission had to be grand and bold. And so, he made himself the focal point of 100 years of Polish Messianism. Is it not Christ's will? Is it not what the Holy Spirit disposes? That this Polish Pope, this Slav Pope, should at this precise moment manifest the spiritual unity of Christian Europe? This wasn't just a casual remark. It resonated with the Poles as a fulfillment of their national destiny under oppression, tying into the messianic idea of Poland's redemptive role. He positioned himself as the Slav Pope, fulfilling Slowacki's prophecy of a Slavic pontiff bringing renewal. The emphasis on this precise moment suggested a divine timing, a hallmark of messianic thought, where Poland's suffering under Nazism and then communism was a prelude to redemption. The spiritual unity of Christian Europe echoes Miscavige's vision of Poland as a catalyst for universal salvation. And then he invoked the Holy Spirit. "Come, Holy Spirit, and from heaven direct on man the rays of your light." Among this joyous crowd, his presence personifying centuries of Polish Messianism, John Paul II again pointed to his election as a sign of Providence. In his own cunning way, the Pope was offering a vision of European Christian unity that transcended political military blocs. The new Moses thrilled his listeners. "Thus, my dear fellow countrymen, this Pope, blood of your blood, bone of your blood, will sing with you, and with you he will exclaim, 'May the glory of the Lord endure forever. We shall not return to the past, we shall go forward to the future.'" So it seems that not only did John Paul believe in Polish Messianism, he believed that he was the culmination of it all, and he was the Polish Messiah. He framed Poland's endurance as a sacred mission, pure Polish Messianism with him being front and center. The message was clear. John Paul saw his papacy and Poland's struggle as being intertwined, a divine plan where suffering Poland would lead the world to resurrection with John Paul leading the way. Then on May 13, 1981, he was shot and critically wounded in an assassination attempt on the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima. His survival was interpreted by him as being providential, tying into a personal and national narrative of sacrificial destiny. Like Poland, the Christ of nations, he saw himself as a suffering servant spared by divine will to fulfill a redemptive mission. He attributed his survival to the intercession of Our Lady of Fatima. His decision to place a bullet in the Virgin's crown at Fatima wasn't just gratitude, it echoed Miscavige's vision of Poland's sacrifices bearing universal fruit. He famously said, "One hand fired and another hand guided the bullet," suggesting that while the assassin pulled the trigger, a divine force altered the bullet's path to spare his life. So John Paul not only allowed himself to be influenced by a sketchy prophecy, he thought that he was the embodiment of it all, and he allowed it to rule his words and actions. The Church has always taught that salvation comes through the Church's sacraments and doctrine, not through a nation's suffering or a pope's personal mission. Miscavige and Toyinsky's ideas blurred those lines, suggesting a mystical redemption outside the Church's authority, something the pre-conciliar Church condemned as heretical. With hindsight, Polish Messianism's grand promises ring hollow. Poland didn't spark a spiritual awakening across Europe. It mirrors the West's materialism. In the 1990s, John Paul's focus shifted away from Polish exceptionalism. His later silence on Miscavige hints at a possible retreat from his previous dreams, yet he never disavowed them. From a traditional Catholic view, his lifelong entanglement with these condemned ideas, however heartfelt they might have been, strayed from the Church's timeless truth, leaving Poland's Christ of Nations a poetic illusion and not a divine mandate. Did he drop his messianic dreams, or did he cling to them to death, seeing Poland's freedom as a partial fulfillment? His silence on Miscavige in later years suggests a possible reevaluation, though he never explicitly renounced those influences. Let me know what you think down below in the comments section. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back in about a week with another one, but in the meantime, please check out my Facebook page, my page on X, and my new page on Instagram. Every day I post additional content that you won't find on this YouTube channel, and also, please pray for the Church.
Mercy, mercy, babe. Ooh, Lord, have mercy on me. Well, if I done somebody wrong,